Sophie Egan's work has helped improve millions of meals served every day through her through her role at the Culinary Institute of America and now her own agency, Full Table Solutions. Egan has galvanized a nationwide movement to help all of us make healthier, more sustainable food choices, from moms to mayors, restaurant chains to food service companies, K-12 school districts to universities. She also serves as a co-director of the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative, an initiative that aims to advance better food choices and menu development at the intersection of health, sustainability imperatives, culinary insight, and next-generation business strategy. A Stanford lecturer and a New York Times contributor, Egan has written for The Washington Post, Eating Well, Time, The Wall Street Journal, Bon Appetit, Wired, and Sunset Magazine. It might be the first time I've actually ever welcomed someone who has exactly that range of breadth in her bio. She's also the author of Devoured, How What We Eat Defines Who We Are. Timothy Egan is a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter and the author of 9 books, including the New York Times bestseller, The Immortal Irishman, and Short Nights of the Shadowcatcher, which won the Chautauqua Prize and the Carnegie Award for Best Nonfiction. Egan worked as a correspondent for the New York Times for 18 years, first as the Pacific Northwest correspondent, and then as a national enterprise reporter, and he now writes a weekly opinion column for the Times, which appears on Fridays. Sophie's new book, How to Be a Conscious Eater, Making Food Choices That Are Good for You, Others, and the Planet, is the subject of tonight's talk. Please join me in welcoming Sophie Egan and Tim Egan.
Well, thank you, Weir, and good evening, Sophie.
Good evening, Dad.
Welcome to Town Hall, to Seattle's living room. I imagine it feels a little bit like a lot of your living rooms. That is to say, it's very intimate. We've got the immortal Rick Simonson here and a handful of technicians, but that's pretty much it. I'm going to imagine, I imagine you are too, Sophie, that the place is packed, that the Great Hall has its normal Seattle crowd, which turns out rain or shine anytime to welcome authors all the time. It's a great honor to be doing this, and thank you for joining us at home as well. I want to just let you know, Sophie and I, we are quarantining as a family and have been doing it for a week now. She's up here from San Francisco and will be with us for a little bit. She's got 2 one-year-old twins and her husband, and my wife and I, Joni Balter, so we're pretty close quarantine family right now, so we're not endangering each other. And I want to take a moment before we get into the presentation tonight, to just say to all my fellow Seattleites that we should thank our medical professionals. We should thank our doctors, our nurses, our primary care people, people working at nursing homes right now, all of whom are putting themselves and their lives at risk. These people are extraordinary, and if you haven't thanked one or done a meal for one or offered a prayer or anything for them, please do that. These people are absolutely remarkable. Also, as most of you know, we are the epicenter of this horrible corona outbreak right now. We have an excess of 1,200 cases in the Seattle metro, in the state as of right now. Only New York State has more. But, beyond that, Seattle itself is, and let's never forget this, it's a city of literature. We're a UNESCO city of literature. So one of the things we do in good times and bad is to tell stories and to inform and to enlighten. I saw a thing today, I had to look it up to make sure it was true because it was one of those things that seemed too good to be true, but that Shakespeare wrote 2 of his best plays, Macbeth and King Lear, while under quarantine for a plague, not the Black Plague, for a plague. So storytelling doesn't come to a stop. Enlightenment doesn't come to a stop. And then also, let me thank Elliott Bay, which is such an extraordinary cultural institution, and all they do, and keeping independent book selling alive and thriving, and Rick Simonson, all he does for this community. Elliott Bay is so valuable to everything that we lovers of the written word do. Now, we are cut off from so many parts of our lives right now, all of us, but we still have food, and we have to rethink this most elemental part of our lives right now. To that end, Sophie, let me ask you the first question about the coronavirus pantry. What is, I know we want to advise everyone, don't hoard. There's plenty of food. Stop buying toilet paper in great quantities, as everyone's been doing. There's plenty of toilet paper. But give us an example of what the healthy pantry should look like.
Absolutely. Well, first I just want to say thank you also to Town Hall, to Elliott Bay Books, and to PCC. I was there today myself with gloves on and perusing the abundant supply. The food supply is looking strong, but really was struck by the notion of a community market, and that word community is going around so much right now. But that is really what is missing tonight in person here. But we're here tonight, my dad and me, to really feel that community and connection with all of you from afar. So we hope that is really the takeaway from tonight, is to offer us as a resource, and hopefully a little bit of a source of comfort. So I also just want to say it is so great to be back in Seattle. I've been in the Bay Area for a little over a decade, and I also just want to thank you, Dad, for taking me into your home. Like any good millennial, I had to move back in with my parents. But at least I brought cute grandkids and a husband who does lots of dishes.
And there's that great line, Rick could probably tell me who it's attributed to, that said, home is that place where when you have to go there, they have to take you in.
Thank goodness. So of all the quarantine mates, you make a pretty good one. And really in the book, the timing, right, it's an interesting thing. I'm grounded like so many of us are from what we thought we might be doing this week and the next coming weeks. But the book offers a 3-part framework for thinking about evaluating foods that you might decide to take home with you or put in your body, for that matter. And it's foods that are good for you, others, and the planet. And in a pandemic, it can seem at first glance like complicating our food choices is just one more overwhelming stress point amid all the other stress points that we're facing. On the other hand, eating is essential. We've heard a lot about non-essential and essential acts, and grocery stores remain open in places of sheltering in place, right? Grubhub and delivery services are all of a sudden these essential activities. And so it is elemental also. I wrote the book, though, because eating is also an ethical act, a political act, it's been said. And so the book is really trying to be a practical guide, a compass for all of you out there, empowering you to align your values with your food choices, to vote with your fork, as it said, and also to vote with your vote. Food policy is a whole separate issue. So to the question of healthy pantry, many of you are stocking up, hopefully keeping plenty of food out there for your neighbors. Community is really an important point there too, because it's not just about what you're able to take home to your own pantry. But as we look at the dry goods and foods that are pretty unsexy, like beans, right, that all of a sudden have, all kinds of interest, really the question of what are we going to stock up on? I offer 3 basic mental checklists, 3-part mental checklist for looking at packaged foods, okay? The food in the package, the words on the package, the packaging itself. So the food, first and foremost, whether it's in your pantry, in your fridge, in the freezer, generally speaking, the easiest, simplest way to know is the more plant-based foods, the better. Doesn't mean you need to become vegan or vegetarian, but by and large, if you are making a plant-forward or plant-centric or a flexitarian or plant-rich, pick your name, approach to eating, generally speaking, that's going to be better for you, and it's also going to be better for the planet. That's a very simple kind of guiding principle. So in the pantry, what is that going to look like? Whole grains, olive oil, plant oils, nuts, dried fruit, legumes, beans, and so forth.
What about the humble lentil you're so high on?
I'm a huge fan of lentils. Lentils are...
I think we're the leading state producer. We're the leading producer.
Montana may also want to have a run at that, though. Phenomenal book, by the way, Lentil Underground, Liz Carlisle, good friend. In any case, lentils definitely belong in the healthy pantry. So also then you want to look at the processing, right? In an ideal world, we'd all be eating only whole foods. But not all processed foods are created equal. So we want to avoid those super processed foods, but not get so hung up on it being from scratch every single item. Then when we look at the animal kingdom, there are lots of great canned seafood options like canned salmon. So eating low on the on the food chain, like sardines, herring, etc. Eat the feed, as it said. Those are great options, frozen as well. So it doesn't have to be all plant-based when you are looking at the animal kingdom. Make sure it's humanely raised, sustainably farmed or raised. And then the other big topic is the words, right? How the heck do I read a food label? This is a topic that I get asked about all the time. And I know we've had many conversations about this. General rule is the front of the package, whether you're now ordering online maybe more, it's a little bit harder, but just to know, the front of the package is generally a billboard. It's mostly marketing. All the facts are the really boring black and white stuff that's either on the side or on the back. So flip it over, get straight to the ingredients list and the nutrition facts panel. In terms of looking at the nutritional profile, you want to keep added sugar and added sodium at bay, and pay attention to both the quantity and quality of calories. And then in that ingredients list, ideally, the first ingredient is the most important. And if that's a food that you recognize, like oats or whole wheat flour, generally a whole food as that first ingredient is going to be also a very good sign.
And this pantry, even the healthiest pantry, doesn't have to be real expensive, right? I mean, we're talking basic foods that are really good for you that you can make delicious. Isn't that right?
Absolutely. And the third part of packaging really especially relates to the economic factor here. So getting a giant tub of oats, for instance, can get you, I don't even know how many, dozens and dozens of breakfasts worth of oatmeal, right? Buying a huge glass jar in the bulk section of beans and cooking that up can get you many, many meals. And it's not only that these dry goods that are, as mentioned, are sort of unsexy, but are really great for you and great for others. They're super versatile, and they're also great vehicles for flavor. So the other thing I was going to mention is make sure that your pantry is stocked with herbs and spices. You've got to feed yourself in a way that is delicious, so that you can turn all those raw ingredients into stuff that you actually want to sit and eat at home.
Right. Okay, so let's move out of the pantry and into the second part of the kitchen. A lot of people during this coronavirus pandemic, are going to learn to cook for the first time. But because they have to learn to cook. Others are going to already know how to cook, but they're going to enhance their skills. They're going to be more creative. Do you have any suggestions, Sophie, on making something relatively easy but still healthy and good for you?
Sure. Well,
I'm putting you on the spot here because I know you're not a chef.
I'm not a chef. That was going to be my first disclaimer. Thank you. So I'm definitely not a chef. I did work at the Culinary Institute of America, the CIA, but I'm not a chef. I know many chefs who are struggling right now, by the way, and we'll get into that in terms of what you can do for restaurant owners and the restaurant profession, restaurant industry. But in terms of cooking for yourself, this is a really interesting kind of outcome of this whole situation. There are a lot of great resources out there. I want to mention Samin Nosrat, a phenomenal chef and author of Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat, has a new pop-up podcast that's called Home Cooking that's meant for exactly this kind of thing. It's coming soon. Washington Post food section has some great online videos, Voraciously and others. There's one called The Quarantine Cooking Show, and
because that's how I learned how to pluck a duck once, was just going online and getting a YouTube video. So you can say...
Julia Child, or?
No, it was a guy in the South.
The black and white YouTube videos.
Some guy gave me a duck once, and I had to pluck it. But you can
learn anything
right
on YouTube. That is true. But in terms of just some easy things, I mean, I think my main goal when I think about overcoming the barrier of learning to cook is it doesn't have to be elaborate. So it can be 5 ingredients or less, and often it's more about assembly, right? Experiment, just throw things together. I had, 2 days ago, someone I know was saying, hey, have you ever tried pumpkin spice on scrambled eggs? And I said, no, I haven't. How was it? She said, it was delicious. Great. I don't think there's a recipe for that.
That sounds horrible.
It sounds horrible. It was actually really good. But the point is, again, if you kind of have, if you lean into it as a sort of a science experiment, and what's the worst that can happen? You've got some time on your hands, perhaps. But no, to get more in concrete with your question, I have kind of 3 go-to templates. And what I mean by that is a frittata, any kind of scrambled egg or frittata where you just throw a bunch of vegetables and olive oil and then scrambled eggs and broil the top.
Pretty easy to make?
It takes 20 minutes, very easy, practically foolproof. I fed the whole family the other day with that. That's a great template in the sense that I use leeks and zucchini. You can use whatever veggies you have, and they can be frozen. Or if you went out to the grocery store that day and got fresh, great. Another one I really like to do is loaded sweet potatoes. This is the purest form of assembly. You roast a sweet potato. I like Japanese purple sweet potatoes in particular. Super amazingly healthy and so flavorful.
And not very expensive?
Very, very inexpensive, and will last a long time in your pantry. And then just dump out black beans, some chopped green onions, maybe a little bit of shredded cheese, lime, aioli if you want, just mayo. That's mayo plus lime. Sounds fancy, it's not. That could be anything that you throw on top of and kind of construct a little tower on your loaded sweet potatoes. And then the third one I would say is greens and beans. So we talked about beans. Any kind of bean, basically sautéed with any kind of green, chard, spinach, you pick, can become kind of a little smear that you put on top, a paste you put on top of basically toast and call it dinner. So shallot goes a long way, by the way, in terms of flavor. So those are three very, very simple, no recipe, under 5 ingredient, under $5 per person, make it home kind of basic approaches you could try.
So I'll actually vouch for the frittata. It was surprisingly good, and you made it real quickly.
You can always throw sriracha on it, like my husband.
So I hear you, Sophie. I can make stuff out of my pantry. I can make good stuff out of my pantry. But now it's Friday night or Saturday night. I've been cooped up for 5 days. I've got to get food from someone else. Can you give us some tips for healthy takeaway food? Because we noticed tonight driving here, a fair amount of places are open for takeaway, for takeout.
Yeah, this is an important question always, but it's an especially important question now, right? Because many of us are relying on delivery more than ever, and many restaurants are relying on delivery more than ever. So as a general rule, food that you cook for yourself is healthier than food that you get away from home. That's just sort of, there's a lot of data around that, but it's not hard and fast. There's so much gray area in between. It's a wide spectrum of how healthy a place might be or not, and how environmentally and socially responsible. So when I say you, others in the planet, I'm talking about others in terms of the impact on all the farm animals and people from farm to fork. So which restaurants do you want to support in terms of how they source, how they menu? Do they have lots of plant-based options? Do they have lots of vegetables? Are they all about local and regional sourcing? Are they supporting the local economy and regional economy through their business? Really getting sort of as a household, and maybe these are some new conversations that are happening at home, figuring out what is it that you want to support with your food dollars in terms of the types of practices that a business may have. A really important one is how does that business treat its restaurant workers? Right now, what is coming to light is something that I learned about in grad school and absolutely shocked me, which is that most I don't know exactly the numbers, but a shocking percentage of restaurant workers don't have any sick pay. And so they actually come to work sick and then infect you as the diner. So restaurants that maybe offer fair wages, have better kind of labor practices, that may also be something that's a higher consideration right now than it has been in the past.
But if I could just interrupt briefly, because you raised the point about restaurant workers who have to go to work sick because they have no other choice. As I understand it, the CDC has affirmed to us that most of your takeout food, most of the food in general, not the packaging necessarily, most of the food is safe. We don't want people to say, oh, I'm afraid to go get takeout food because it's not safe.
No, I'm very glad you clarified that. I am by no stretch suggesting that the food is not safe now. Point there is just that historically this has been around, but this issue is coming to light more as people become worried about this, and restaurants are saying, no, we're not by any stretch going to do that in this crisis. So instead, though, they do need relief. And as you are making your choices of what to eat at home, a couple key things to keep in mind. So it's finding out ahead of time, doing that homework of which type of small businesses in particular right now. There's a hashtag too small to fail that is really trying to get support for especially family-run businesses. Many individuals live paycheck to paycheck.
I have a feeling too small to fail is going to be a political movement before long, too.
It really seems. I mean, it's gaining a lot of traction. There's this huge petition from chefs to be included in the stimulus package for smaller businesses, and again, kind of that local and smaller business may be of higher priority for you right now than at other times. The other big thing, though, is your own health still, right? We really need to be mindful of our immune systems and eating in ways that are going to nourish ourselves and keep taking good care. So one of the main things I like to point out is that a lot of takeout menus have, like, any kind of, name your cuisine, Chinese food, Indian food, Thai food, have incredible vegetable dishes that are often overlooked. So try to load up on veggies first and foremost, and then use, sort of the meat-centric dishes as more of a garnish or a side dish. Kind of flip the ratios, if you will. This is a concept the Culinary Institute has put out called the protein flip, and that's really a good way to think about the ratios you want to aim for. But it also is what we need to do for our health, and that has to start with what you order in the first place. The other thing that's really, really important is portion size. So really, food waste is an incredibly important issue, as we know, and that also starts with what you are ordering. So is your family going to eat all of it? For example, often takeout comes with a giant container of white rice. If you don't want the white rice, opt out of it at the point of purchase rather than get it into your house and then chuck it. That wastes every resource imaginable. So being really mindful about the portions, about food waste when you're at the point of actually making your purchase is going to go a long way.
So you sort of touched on this a little bit, and it flows nicely into the next question. In your book, How to Be a Conscious Eater, you say a stat that I hadn't heard before, that 1 in 7 workers in America, 1 in 7, are somehow affiliated with the food industry. I mean, that's just extraordinary. How can we support this community?
Yeah, it is extraordinary. And part of what's so fun and fascinating about working in food, there are many attributes. One is that everybody eats, but the other is how complex the food system is. And so when you think about that number, where that's coming from, it's restaurant workers, but that's maybe who we interact with, right? Retailers, there's farmers, distributors, processors, the entire supply chain, so many individuals, companies, and pieces involved. So I mentioned already this really policy aspect. So some ideas have floated around, like you can buy gift cards for restaurants in the meantime, tipping generously if you're in a position to do that. There are donation-based relief funds going on. Restaurant Opportunity Center, United has a platform for that. But honestly, I don't think those are sustainable. The biggest support has to come from policy, because so many of us as diners are facing the same facing economic issues. They don't put us in a position to collectively as diners bail out the restaurant industry, right? This has to happen at a federal level. So there is a call for this to occur that hopefully will go forward. And the other one is on local farmers in particular. So there's this kind of local and small scale restaurateurs, but think about farmers markets right now. In many cases, farmers markets are not considered essential. They're kind of in a gray area. They're often sort of not fully retailer, but they are sort of a community space, event space, right? They may have music, and there's kind of close quarters. So right now it's a state-by-state or local decision. And that's actually a very troubling, because you have these small-scale farmers who are accustomed to direct-to-consumer pathways that are being cut off right now. At the same time that schools are closed, they're often supplying school meal programs. Universities are closed. They're often supporting university food programs, and they are facing a lot of fragility there. So I would look at other ways to make your delivery direct to producer. Farm Fresh to You is a CSA I was part of in San Francisco. They're still delivering imperfect produce. Find out what those other kind of delivery CSA type of models are that you can support.
That's a great point, because we're very close to opening all our farmers markets. In this city, we have terrific farmers markets in all the neighborhoods. I'm pretty sure they will not be open for the foreseeable future because of the general thing up against non-essential meetings. And that's a great, if we should all reach and look at ways that we can connect to those farmers somehow through pipelines that I'm sure will be opening up, because they're going to have to sell their produce directly.
Right, and one of the biggest challenges is that so often they lack the technology and distribution channels to reach us as diners or as consumers, as eaters, and so it's where those farmers markets, those in-person connections allow them access to markets. So I'm hopeful that some technology solutions will come into play with online transactions and delivery. But basically, the point with the takeout question as well is just remember that takeout and delivery go beyond Amazon Prime and Whole Foods and the like, right? It's, PCC, of course, too, but there are a lot of other ways to access food at your doorstep.
Okay. So, you know me. I'm always looking for a bargain. A lot of people are looking for bargains. And I often, like a lot of people, I suppose, will buy the meat that says it's marked off 30% because it's close to the sell-by date. In your book, you have an excellent chapter, I thought, on sell-by dates. I'm sort of confused what they mean. Does that mean the food is going bad on that day and I should not touch it? Can you give us a little bit of enlightenment for those of us who buy food at or near the sell-by date? I know I shouldn't be doing that.
No, well, yes and no, all at once. So I'll explain. Basically, you're not alone. Sell-by dates, there's no standardization of the meanings right now. There are sell-by, best if used by, many different iterations. The bottom line is that it is not an indication generally of food safety. It's about quality standards that the manufacturer believes after that point it will not be at that quality threshold of freshness and taste that they wish it to have you experience with their product. So there's actually a really interesting bill that just got sort of a new version put forward by Shelley Pingree that would standardize the dates, the labels, to a 2-label scheme. One would be for quality, and that would be best if used by, and one would be for safety, used by, so that you get the difference, right?
That's a really interesting
That
thing.
would be
Yeah.
very helpful,
Right.
but currently we're all left wondering, ooh, it's kind of iffy, sort of on the edge, I don't know, I'll just throw it away, right? You sort of have a better safe than sorry approach. The reason this is such a crisis is we have the triple threat of climate change, malnutrition, and obesity. And they're very related to the question of, should I throw this out? Should I buy it? Should I not? And what I mean is, if food waste were a country, it would be the 3rd largest emitter after China and the United States. That is tremendous. I'll tell you another shocking statistic. Out of 80 solutions, the most effective solutions for reversing global warming, number 3 is reducing food waste. So when we waste food, it's all the resources that went into producing it, transporting it, processing it, packaging it, and then what happens to it afterward. So this is a really, really, really important issue. At the same time, we have food insecurity, an absolute crisis that this crisis is only exacerbating because of how many children rely on school meals for food, and because of all of the forthcoming economic impacts. So we have plenty of food out there. It's good. The point is we need to make sure that we have this labeling scheme in place to enable us. In the meantime, until hopefully this legislation goes forward, what can you do? We actually are equipped as eaters with some pretty sophisticated sensors. And by that I mean your nose and your eyes. The sniff test, we're sort of out of practice with trusting our instincts on this, but you can look at does it have mold? Does the milk smell off? There are various tricks. SaveTheFood.com is a great resource from National Resources Defense Council, and a phenomenal book I recommend is Dana Gunder's The Waste-Free Kitchen Handbook that has tons of details on how you can basically freeze anything, which foods you can sort of cut the moldy part off of and which ones you can't. And then lastly, just on the point about deli meats, that actually is one of the ones that you do want to pay attention to, the expiration date. Not expiration date, the sell-by date, because it's one of the few foods where listeria can grow. And so basically the foods where you want to actually be a little bit more vigilant are the same set of foods that pregnant women are told to avoid, but you wouldn't know which list that is. So.
Well, there goes all that half-off sausage I've been buying all these years. So I've been to Costco twice in the last 3 weeks, partially as journalistic curiosity, partially as a consumer. And one of the things inexplicable to me and a lot of people is this huge run on toilet paper. I mean, they put the pallets out and they disappear immediately. The other thing is the huge run on bottled water. Now, in your book, you say that tap water beats all. we have a pretty good water supply in Seattle. Why does tap water beat all, and why do we not need to load up on so much bottled water?
Yeah, we're fortunate to have such a good water supply in Seattle and in the U.S. overall, where about 90% of the time, the tap water is perfectly safe. We have a lot of important exceptions that have Flint, of course, and this is not to be taken lightly in the cases where the tap water is not safe. But there are a lot of ways you can find that out. For instance, if you rely on your own well, that's more likely to be a case where you can't trust the tap water. There are a couple of other cases where you may be more skeptical. But generally speaking, and definitely in Seattle, the water supply is safe. And in this pandemic, there have been several entities, the WHO and EPA have been very clear, drink the tap water. It is not, the virus does not appear to be transmitted. There's not a concern about it being in the water supply. And so one of the other things that's often overlooked about bottled water, there are a lot of reasons that it beats tap water. I'll just run through the list for you.
In some cases, you're drinking like Houston's tap water.
Well, I don't. You may not know where it comes from, but it's actually less screened in terms of the the contaminants and things in it than tap water is, which you wouldn't know. Often it's just it is tap water as opposed to from some beautiful spring, with something magical having been done to it, I don't know, like fairy dust. But in all seriousness, I think there is a sense right now that it's more hygienic to use single use overall, but reusability, just a plain old glass or coffee mug or whatever you bring your own container versus those single use is always better for almost always better for the environment. So the point is that the water is safe. It's more environmentally friendly not to use plastic bottles. And the other really important thing is that it's far, far more economical. Did you know that we actually spend about 2,000 times the price of tap water on a bottled water? So tap water's not quite free, but it's almost free. So especially as we're looking at these, economic times ahead and all that we're doing just in general to use our grocery dollar as well, bottled water is really not something that you want to be spending your money on. One asterisk that I want to make there is that a point I make in the book is that it always comes back to as opposed to what. So if you're choosing between a bottled soda and bottled water, yes, please drink the bottled water. But if we're talking about just generally what form to drink your water in, bottles are not the best option.
Okay. So one of the many things I didn't know anything about until I read your book was this idea of strengthening your immune system, which everyone's interested in right now, through prebiotics. Am I saying that right? Prebiotics.
Yes.
Can you explain some foods? Explain the concept of a healthy gut.
Sure. So basically this idea of a healthy gut is that each of us, it might sound a little gross, but each of us has a hopefully thriving community of bacteria that actually are doing all kinds of good things for our metabolism, our digestive system, and our immune systems. Now, one caveat is that the science of the gut bacteria, of these microbes, healthy, good microbes, is still relatively early. But thus far, the best available evidence points to two key things. Prebiotics, which is fiber, foods that are fiber-rich, essentially are food for these microbes. So you have to #feed your gut by eating fiber-rich foods. Which kinds of foods have fiber? A lot of the same foods that I mentioned before being really super healthy for you, like legumes, whole grains, fruits and vegetables. So you have to it's like fertilizer for your gut is what it's often talked about, described as. And then at the same time, introducing microbes to that community, kind of welcoming new neighbors, if you will, through probiotics. So those are foods that are fermented, like, kimchi, sauerkraut, yogurt, kefir, and through that combination, it's not by any stretch to say that your immune system will be impenetrable, but it is, registered dietitians will tell you that is one of the ways that you can use food to kind of, do your best to keep your body thriving. Some of the other ways, of course, are getting lots of good, vitamins through kind of eating the rainbow of produce. Another colleague.
You're not a believer in vitamin supplements in general, are you?
I am not, and I'm so glad you said that, because that is one of the other things that, by and large, there's consensus that the nature's package of whole fruits and vegetables is a far more effective delivery mechanism for vitamins and minerals than supplements. And so often the way that's absorbed, you're getting 1,000% of what your daily needs are. It's actually just wasted money. And not to mention supplements are not regulated, so you don't even know what's in there often. So definitely the best way is through real whole foods. But a great resource too on the kind of general ways to boost your immune system was just posted on a colleague's blog who has it's called Strategic Nutrition Design, Allison Acera, and she has a whole bunch of other great ones, like actually being careful about your alcohol intake during this time because it can disrupt your sleep, which, as we know, sleep and stress are enemies number 1 and 2 of your immune system. So definitely encourage you to take a look there for other ideas.
So normally, present situation aside, this is the start of the real glory season for Seattle. We're getting, 4 or 5 minutes of daylight a day. Trees are starting to pop and blossom. It's got that sort of impressionistic feel to the outdoors. One of the many things I love about spring, baseball, renewal, all of that, is that there's fresh wild salmon on the way. That we'll soon be getting our fresh wild salmon from Alaska, probably Copper River. It starts really expensive, but then it eventually comes down. You have an excellent section in your book, I thought, on the difference between farmed salmon, which you can get year-round, and fresh wild salmon, or wild salmon that's been previously frozen. A lot of people will generally say, why shouldn't I buy the farmed? It looks okay. It's much cheaper. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, this is definitely a fraught question, farmed versus wild, and it comes down to sort of the default way that farmed salmon in particular, not all farmed fish and seafood, but farmed salmon in particular, the usual way of running business, and that is basically the same idea as a CAFO. So a CAFO is a confined animal feeding operation. This is what we picture of those, just absolutely wall-to-wall factory farms, cows butt to butt. That's basically what happens with fish, with the salmon farm, and you have all the same kind of issues in these kind of CAFOs of the sea, where too many animals in too small a space, fed too much suboptimal feed, getting too little exercise. And so one of the really important things to remember when you're eating any animal-based food is that what they eat ends up in your body too. So there's a great quote that you are what you eat eats. And this is really what I often kind of get queasy about with farmed fish.
It's sometimes called the chicken of the sea.
Yeah, I don't know, that doesn't sound appetizing either. But the other issues that happen are, so you have in those confined spaces, you have pesticides, you have antibiotics because there's a lot of disease. You have there's no hard borders in the sea. It's hard to kind of keep the fish the boundaries there, and so you also have invasive species sometimes where they're getting let loose and then breeding with other wild fish. Then you have the issue that in farmed fish, often a pink dye is used in place of the krill that is what gives wild fish that pink hue that we all love, because basically researchers found that nobody wants to eat a gray fillet of salmon, so ergo, the artificial dye. So you have that, you have other, all kinds of toxic chemicals that are sometimes involved. So generally speaking, I'm not a fan of farmed salmon. That said, again, there's a lot of nuance with conscious eating, and not all aquaculture is created equal. So a really phenomenal certification to find out which types of fish farming is using responsible, environmentally and socially responsible practices is the Aquaculture Stewardship Council's little seal. And so you can look for the sources that are doing the right thing and where you would feel good putting that in your body.
So our time's dwindling, but I want to give you a chance to talk about one of the things you and I have spoken of a lot, which is climate change. And this global pandemic is one of these moments, I think, where we realize how small the planet is, we realize how fragile the planet is, we realize how we're all interconnected. Do you want to talk about that and how the conscious choices that we make every day as consumers contribute to a better world?
I do. I'll be brief.
I'm letting you out with a real easy question here, Sophie.
Just the climate emergency. No, I think my hope is that this acute crisis, which has many traits that are similar to the climate crisis, will be sort of an alarm bell that gets us in practice at a couple of things. One is realizing the interdependence, and that we are a global community, and getting a little bit less in the consumer individualistic mindset and more of we are all in this together. The other part that I really hope is that it really shows the way that what I do affects you. So if I am able to waste less food and eat a plant-rich diet, number 3 and 4 of the 80 most effective solutions for reversing global warming, that can help over time if all of us in the aggregate, through the power of collective action, coordinated collective action toward a shared goal, we can actually meaningfully reverse global warming by the deadline that scientists have given us, which is 2030, just around the corner. And so it's not to be doomsday about it, it's to really actually show the way that, you know, as the spirit of coming together with small changes, adding up adding up together and making a huge difference is really something I hope can be a little bit of a silver lining throughout this entire crisis. And also to also see it as climate change, that is, as a crisis, as an emergency. And what I'm really heartened by in this whole last couple of weeks is how quickly we've all changed behavior. That's what I've been doing all throughout my career, is understanding behavior change. And it's always said that it takes a really long time to change behavior, sometimes a generation. I think the fact that we've all taken up hand washing and elbow bumps and namaste and so forth in such a relatively rapid period of time shows that we can actually change our habits rather quickly. And I am very, very optimistic about our power to shift habits when we're told, the time is now to act.
I think we're going to take some questions now from folks at home.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much to both of you. We're going to start answering questions now. Just a reminder that we're getting these from the comment sections on the live stream, so if you want to participate, please submit them now. The first one is from Peg on our YouTube page. I have a huge jar of split peas. What can I do besides soup?
Ooh, I am not an expert in split pea recipes. However, I wish I was at this time, because it is a great time to be an author of anything in that realm. Speaking of which, phenomenal cookbook, Joe Yonan, Cool Beans, probably has lots and lots of good ideas for that. So basically, I would say they're fantastic cookbook authors who would give you all kinds of recipe ideas. Do you have one?
So I wrote a book about the Great Depression called The Worst Hard Time, which was worse than this. And people would boil up a huge pot of split peas, but flavor it with a little bit of ham. Throw a little ham hock in there just to give it that. It's what the Italians always do too, just a teeny bit of pork flavor.
Awesome. Are there any specific foods that enhance one's immune system? And this is from Marilyn on our YouTube page.
Yes. So we talked a little bit about the prebiotics and probiotics, right? Essentially, that really comes down to the fiber-rich foods are the prebiotic foods, and the probiotic foods are the kind of healthy microbes themselves. So foods that have live. You may see when you eat yogurt or sour cream and so forth that says live cultures, right? That means that you're introducing those microbes into your gut bacteria. So that's pretty early days. The other research that is that's been indicated with connections to healthy immune system are omega-3 rich foods. I'm not a registered dietitian, so I wouldn't, I can't tell you the details on that, but dark leafy greens, walnuts, all kinds of, salmon, like we mentioned, are rich in those foods, or are rich in omega-3s. And then really the antioxidant-rich and vitamin-rich foods of, fruits and vegetables. We know a lot of those. And mentioned before, but being mindful of not only alcohol, but caffeine, and just thinking about foods that may affect how we sleep in any way, and also stress. So one of the things I want to mention in terms of immune system is, and I talk about this in the book a lot, is like, foods that are good for you is not just nutrition, it's also good for the whole you. Like, what brings you joy? What's comforting? What connects you with your family? What's nostalgic? What is in season? So really thinking too about what's going to just leave you feeling really good right now, because I think one of the things is we want to have good immune system, so we also need to take care of our whole selves, and emotionally, spiritually, and mentally too.
All right, this one is from Sherry on our YouTube page. Do you happen to know how much attention is being paid to and progress made in addressing so-called food deserts in our country?
Yes, so there's been a couple of, so food deserts are essentially areas areas where access to healthy, nutritious food is lacking. Some of the most exciting progress that I've seen is really around corner stores, converting corner store kind of front, checkout areas into produce stands. There's a statistic somewhere that bananas are actually one of the most best-selling items in not just corner stores but convenience stores. So thinking about how can we take advantage of some of those more convenient, 7-Eleven and the like, and actually turning them into sources of healthy foods. Another one that is really helpful is where vegetable prescription type of programs that are helping low-income eaters actually use their SNAP benefits, or there's vegetable prescriptions where your doctor says, like, here's a prescription to go eat these fruits and vegetables, but then actually also connecting those with SNAP benefits, which is food stamps, and then often those will actually have even matching programs through farmers markets, and then really getting farmers markets into underserved communities as well, where there may not be a grocery store in place that has the available supply for that community of foods that will really that are going to be good for them and good for others.
All right, this one is from Jess. Hi, Sophie. Hi, Tim. Sophie, thanks for such a great talk on such an important topic. Can you tell us a bit about your new business, Full Table Solutions?
Hi, Jess, PR agent. Thank you. Sure. So Full Table Solutions is my new consulting practice that is a catalyst for food systems transformation. So essentially, I'm planning to, it just launched last month, and I work with organizations on strategic communications, sustainability strategy, really trying to accelerate solutions at the intersection of food, health, and climate. So I mentioned a little bit, but institutions are schools, healthcare systems, universities, corporate dining programs, like Google or Amazon and so forth. These can be really powerful levers in the system because of their purchasing power. So I'm really excited to work with collaborations and coalitions of organizations who see that critical window of time we have for collective action. I call it the defining decade, which is this period now through 2030, to take advantage of what an enormous difference we can make at that intersection in terms of climate action with food choices, but really at the production scale. And this is an often overlooked solution. So I really look forward to working with collaborators all over the country and beyond as I go forward with my business. So thank you.
All right, this one is from Marilyn. It seems that all pandemics are viruses crossing over to humans via animals. Have there ever been pandemics related to eating plants?
I don't know. Do you know historian Tim?
Well, there's been E. coli outbreaks, of course. She said related to plants, right? I mean, we've had broccoli and strawberries and things that we normally consider healthy that we've had horrible E. coli outbreaks on that have killed people, that have been terrible. But as far as pandemics, You go back to the Great Plague, which it's mythically thought to still have come from rats. There's a lot of historians now dispute that it was something else, that was just general horrible conditions. But most of them, and we still don't know the source of this one as well. People say it was the food markets of China that just started in bats or something like that and then moved to there, and that hasn't been definitively established yet. But it's a good question, because as far as what little I know about plagues, and having just researched a lot of the Middle Ages, they never came from plants. I mean, they came from something would come into the area in the dark of winter, usually in the damp season, in the dark season. Mm-hmm. Sunlight, they say, is the best disinfectant for this. So I've never heard of one from plants.
What about the Irish, the potato?
So the potato famine, of course, was starvation. And the potato crop failed because it had a fungus on it. But it wasn't a plague.
It
didn't kill people who then touched other people. It was because you had a lack of food. And don't get me started on this, because British exporting of food from Ireland was a huge contributor to the million Irish who lost their lives.
Thank goodness we have a historian on hand.
Thank you for that opportunity.
All right, this one is from Nick. I'm a high school culinary teacher. What are some ways that I can get them interested in healthier eating?
Ooh, kudos to you. That is a really important and super fun position to be in, because getting kids cooking early and ideally planting their own food and growing it is one of the best ways for lifetime of a healthy relationship to food. So some ideas for getting kids excited about cooking. I would just go back to what I suggest for adults, which is to try to take off some of the pressure. It doesn't have to be a restaurant quality. I think one of the things that's sort of a negative of Instagram food culture is this idea that it has to be plated perfectly with a flower, and it is, gorgeous, not toppling over. But some of the really delicious, great tasting foods look like mush. I mean, I eat a bowl of oatmeal every day. It looks like vomit. Honestly, I'm not kidding. It's delicious. Flax meal, banana. But my point there is everything doesn't have to be Instagram worthy and perfectly plated and beautiful. And that can kind of free up some of the anxiety. A lot of the time there's an intimidation factor with just stepping into the kitchen. What do I even do with these utensils? How do I hold a knife? And actually, on that note, knife skills are one of the most important first places to start, because in order to get excited about cooking, it can't be frustrating. And if you don't have proper knife skills, it takes forever just to do the prep involved, in the step before you get to all the fun of throwing it all together. So really having the skills in order to have the self-efficacy that if I do get excited about this, I can bring this, set of ingredients to life. And the other thing I would say is to, especially now that we're all grounded, consider food a passport to the world and go country by country with your students as a great way to explore every culture, language, ingredients, what grows there, what are the holidays, what are the religious beliefs, and how did the cuisine spring from that, and how can I then sort of taste the world from the comfort of your home or school or wherever it is that they're cooking together.
That sounds like a good lesson plan.
I would take that lesson.
All right, this one is from Deborah. I want to be a conscious eater, but I love restaurants. Isn't there a structural problem with restaurants and the generation of food waste? And are there any strategies restaurants are beginning to deploy at a scale to minimize waste?
Oh, yes, definitely. So, and I want to make sure that I'm clear that the restaurants are not the enemy by any stretch. Being a conscious eater is absolutely possible when eating out. Right now, one of the main ways I suggest kind of finding out which restaurants are in a better position than others is there are some different kind of organizers out there of like scorecards of who's doing what, who's buying meat that is not from animals raised with antibiotics, Consumer Reports puts that scorecard out. Good Food Institute has one that shows kind of the number of plant-based foods on a menu. In terms of waste, a lot of the time what's occurring is behind the scenes. So often, I mean, chefs and restaurateurs, they just want to feed you delicious food. They don't want to hit you over the head with information when you're there, just trying to enjoy a nice meal with your family. So oftentimes you have to go on their websites and dig a little bit deeper, but tons of restaurants and food service operations are really leaning into what they can do with respect to food waste through programs like Lean Path, which is a technology platform that enables them to do pretty sophisticated kind of internal audits and tracking. Schools, a lot of school districts actually even have this in the back of the house, in the kitchen. You wouldn't know this is all occurring. So I guess I would just say that know that there is a tremendous amount going into the food waste opportunity that I described, and if you want to support those restaurants that are doing their part, sometimes you have to look at their websites. The other thing I would tell you as a conscious eater, eating out is a really exciting organization called Zero Foodprint. And this is actually about carbon neutral restaurants, where they're not only wasting less food, but they're investing in carbon offsets. They have their restaurant design that may be zero waste in some way. The foods they're sourcing, they have done life cycle assessments to determine, and often it's sort of with a surcharge at the end, but Chef Anthony Mient and his wife Karen Leibowitz just got this Humanitarian of the Year award from James Beard Foundation because of that initiative. So they're also collecting, they have a whole list of restaurants too, and the hope is that soon enough you'll be able to actually use a kind of carbon or a carbon neutral filter when you're searching for restaurants on Yelp and OpenTable. So hopefully that's coming soon.
All right, Deanna is asking, what political action should be taken to improve food consciousness and ethical consumption, and what can we do?
I don't have nearly enough time to answer that question. So this is a refrain, it's sort of cliche, but it is actually worth saying, which is voting with your fork is a concept that people say about being a conscious eater, but voting with your vote is also a really important thing to do. And what I would like to see is food policies, not just food aspects of healthcare policies or of climate policies, but demanding that at the federal level, we have actually a food czar, as we did have in the Obama administration, and really having a coordinated senior executive position who understands unintended consequences and the systems level nature of food, the fact that food is connected to everything, commerce and trade and education and health and environmental, environmental protection and so forth. So at a big picture, it would be great to have federal food policies that are actually designed to keep people healthy, that care about soil health, that care about natural resources. And then on the local level, there's a lot that is of great stuff that is happening. There are different C40 is a collaboration of cities that are really committed at the sort of what can we do at the city level? Do we have composting programs, curbside composting? How's our waste diversion level? Can we kind of get competitive city to city? San Francisco has like one of the highest in the country in terms of its recycling rate. Like, let's get fired up about that. Mm-hmm. So I would look at both that local level in terms of infrastructure and systems in place that your municipality may be able to offer, and then also really demanding at the presidential level, executive branch and beyond, that we have federal food policy that first and foremost is, as I said, aimed at feeding people healthy and healthfully and sustainably, but also really addresses the crisis of hunger and food access in this country.
All right, this one is via Ryan on our YouTube page. What are your thoughts on why fresh, healthy foods tend to be more expensive than unhealthy, prepackaged and frozen dinners?
Yes, I have lots of thoughts also. I'll try to be brief. One of the biggest reasons is that the true cost of food is not included in the price of those cheaper options. By that I mean often the foods that are more processed and less fresh and so forth have sent their costs downstream. So they're probably not paying their workers very much. They're probably not being very responsible with how they're raising the food, or raising or growing the food. The packaging cost, all the petroleum that goes into the plastics, right? These costs are not being borne out by the person that's charging you for it. And so often, for example, when you buy from a farmer's market maybe, or when you buy direct, when you buy organic, right? So often it's more expensive. And sometimes that's because that's really what it took, fair trade, bananas and so forth. These products often, but not always, and we talked a lot about this already, so I want to make sure we understand it. It's not as if conscious eating means more expensive eating. But in some cases, it does mean that the true cost of the food is being reflected back to you as the consumer or the eater, whereas in other cases, thankfully, it actually is all aligned where it's good for you, good for the planet, and good for your pocketbook, as in the case of like just a giant can of beans, right, or a giant tub of oats.
All right, this one is from our YouTube page, and their name is Dog Eating a Burrito. What advice do you give to those who are food insecure on a daily basis? What bottom dollar price tag do you put on covering your daily nutritional budget?
Yes, so we covered this a little bit just now, but I'll build on that to the extent that I can. So food insecurity is not the fault of an individual. Food insecurity needs to be addressed at a policy level. So I have a background in public health, and fundamentally what that tells us, the school of thought, the training of public health, is that we are all products of our environment. And in the case of food insecurity in this country, we do not have a lack of food, we have a food distribution problem. We have too much waste, we have too much, by that I mean food that's wasted. We also have food that's produced that's nutritionally useless, right? Junk food is a waste of resources. I always like to point out that empty calories are also an environmental issue. So this is a systematic injustice that should not be up to food insecure individuals to solve. That said, of course, it is a daily struggle. And so seeking out what the available public assistance programs that are in place, and we have so much room that really needs to be, so much room for improvement still, but thankfully there have been a lot of improvements. I mentioned some of those, like accepting SNAP benefits at farmers markets and the like, but it's not nearly sufficient right now in terms of what is provided on a daily basis for the budget, in order to feed yourself on a limited budget and your family on a limited budget.
All right, this will be our final question, and it's from the Carrie Guest on YouTube. In terms of climate change, what are 3 immediately actionable things that the average consumer can do starting now?
Great. 3 things you can do today, tonight, tomorrow. Waste less food, and of the food you waste, don't waste red meat. That has the highest carbon and water footprint. Eat a plant-rich diet, so it doesn't have to be all plant-based foods, but mostly plant-based foods. Those will be best for you and have the least impact on the planet. Third, really embrace reusability. The more that we can get away from this mindset of disposability, single use, it's not just plastics, it's all types of packaging, the better off we'll be with those 3 actions. I have a 4th one. That is do what you can with your food purchases to save our soil. Soil is critical to the food supply. It's critical to the nutritional value of the food that's produced. And how can you support that through food choices? You can buy organic when possible, when it's within your budget. And increasingly, you can buy food that's produced through regenerative practices, which not only minimizes the harm, but actually leaves the soil healthier than it was before, and is now emerging as actually a carbon sequestration solution.
Well, that concludes our presentation tonight. Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, Town Hall. Thank you, Elliott Bay. Thank you, PCC. Good night, everybody, and a bit of encouragement. We will get through this. Take care.
Thank you so much.